Do you ever get the feeling that nobody wants you healthy? That's the topic that we're going to be addressing today on Flourish-Meant. I'm your host, Tina Yeager. Today, I have the privilege of welcoming a special guest. He is a Yale-educated doctor, Dr. Mark Richards, and he's been a physician consultant to the White House. He has also done a lot of leadership positions in medical and surgical societies. So welcome, Dr. Richards. I am thrilled that we're going to be able to address this much needed topic today and get people the answers that they need to be able to take control of their health and access the treatment procedures that may truly help them and those that they care about.
Thank you, Tina.
So Dr. Richards, let's talk about what led you into this really important information that could help treat some otherwise untreatable, it seemed, almost conditions that people were suffering from.
So it was all by accident or divine intervention, either way you want to look at it. As a plastic surgeon, I was boarded in general surgery, plastic surgery, and I developed some procedures. So I was co-scientific director of the largest aesthetic medicine and surgery conference in the world in Paris. It's held every year. And this was back in 2005. And the director of the conference told me he wanted me to go to an anti-aging seminar that was a half a day before the 3-day conference where I was on many panels and giving lectures. And so I said, okay, I'm not very excited about it because most of the anti-aging conferences focus on, basically snake oil. There's very little human science behind it, and they just make parallels between rats and humans, or they just make up the science. So I was not excited, but I went because it was my duty. And two of the lectures changed my life that day. And neither one of them gave me the answers, but boy, they raised the questions. Just to give one example, one of the lectures that really changed my life was an endocrinologist from the University of Belgium. And he had a very famous clinic, and people from all over Europe went to his clinic. And he said things like, people come because they're gaining weight, their blood sugar is high, they're a little depressed, they're not sleeping well, they're fatigued in the morning. The first thing I do is take them off their statin drugs and put them on a diet and exercise program. But at the end of the day, I have to put all of them, the men and the women, on testosterone in order to make them better. And that, of course, sent alarm bells through me because I was trying to figure out what the heck he was talking about because, I spent 10 minutes in med school on testosterone, just like everybody else who gets trained modern day medicine. I went back home and I started looking at those symptoms, which I had all those symptoms, and started researching what testosterone was about. I realized over the course of the next couple of years of spending 10,000 hours plus reading research, dating back to 1940, because we have used testosterone pellets, which we'll get into later, in the US since 1939. And men and women. And so a lot of stuff I was never taught started to come to the surface. And then I started realizing that we have chronic illnesses in this country that just were not around to this level in 1970. Some of the things are 10 times higher, like, diabetes, obesity, high blood pressure, breast cancer, strokes, dementia, Alzheimer's, depression, neurologic anxiety disorders, autoimmune diseases, all these things. It just kept going on and on. And I said, wow, could there be a common thread in all of this? And that's what led me to this discovery. And if you'd like, I can tell you about the book that I wrote called Nobody Wants You Healthy. And there's a website called nobodywantsyouhealthy.com where you can look at podcasts and also interviews such as this for people that are interested. So because I won't be able to have time to go into every detail that people may be interested in.
Now, for everyone out there who doesn't know what endocrinology is, that's the study of your hormones, the things that regulate the changes in your body as you mature, and I guess is the best way to put that. And there's a natural system to it, but there are things in our environment and the things that we eat that will cause havoc with your endocrine system, right?
Right. We'll call that the hormone system to keep things easy.
Okay, call that the hormone system so everybody understands.
Right. So just as a brief history of what a hormone is, these cells, they have to be able to communicate. So how can a cell, like in your toe communicate with, cells elsewhere in order to maintain health. And the only way they can do that is a substance that transfers between the cells and takes information. That's basically what a hormone is. So going back to what I learned over the last 15, 17 years, actually 19 years now, of reading and researching and teaching doctors and lecturing around the world and treating thousands and thousands of patients, what I've learned is that in 1965, the movie The Graduate came out, and there was a big scene in there where Benjamin is told, plastics, son, plastics, that's the field you want to go into to make money. And that was true. The plastics changed our entire world. Instead of going to the car dealership and choosing between cloth seats and leather seats, you now had vinyl seats. Instead of going to the doctor's office and having a plastic syringe and a plastic IV, you had a glass syringe with metal needles and rubber tubing into the glass IV bottle. So those are just two little things. So we developed plastics, and we developed more and more plastics. And what we didn't realize in 1970 was that the chemicals that makes plastic act like plastics, it's a chemical class called phthalates, are actually the most powerful hormone disruptors we've ever mass produced. If you jump forward to today, we manufacture yearly 400 million metric tons, which is 200 times the toxic dose for every man, woman, child on the planet. Now, this wreaks havoc. If your cells can't communicate properly with each other, you can only imagine what happens. So then that was the first pillar, was that we are poisoning ourselves and we're killing ourselves. We're causing infertility and a massive rise in chronic diseases. How did that happen? Well, the most abundant hormone, the most abundant bioactive hormone in men and women their entire life is testosterone. Most all life forms have some form of testosterone in them. Now, what does testosterone do? I'll jump, first of all, for the women out there that don't think they really have testosterone, it is your most abundant hormone, and it makes 100% of the estrogen that's inside each of your cells. And that goes for you or for me, because all of our cells, almost all our cells, need estrogen for cellular repair. What else does testosterone do? Well, it makes a chemical called IGF-1, which is what makes your cells sensitive to insulin. So if your testosterone is low, your IGF-1 is low. And when that happens, you become diabetic because your cells can't handle the sugar because they can't respond to insulin. It also makes a compound called adiponectin, which helps you burn body fat as a calorie source. So when that's low, you tend to get overweight and even obese. Importantly, it also controls inflammation and immunity. So what's inflammation? Inflammation is when you get an inflammatory injury, you get an injury to your cells, or your joints are inflamed, sore, things like that. But when it happens to your vessels, your body responds by making plaques. So it starts creating cholesterol plaques. Cholesterol doesn't cause the plaques. It's the inflammation that causes the plaques. And cholesterol is just the body's Band-Aid. It also causes your joint pain. It also helps control autoimmune diseases because it prevents the body from attacking itself. Testosterone does. It allows the brain, which is our most active organ in our body, really, because it's constantly, filing memories, retrieving memories, looking at stimuli, it's making nerve connections all the time. It provides the testosterone and estrogen that's critical for all the neurons to actually develop and remodel continually. So there's many, many things that testosterone does. And most of them are to preserve mental health and physical health. Now, that's the second pillar of the book. So I go into chapters on different diseases and how testosterone affects it and put scientific references in, because the book was written half for doctors and half for lay people. The third part was the most upsetting part of it all, which is why nobody wants you healthy. The pharmaceutical industry makes trillions of dollars a year in global revenue. And 90% of that revenue comes from treating, but never preventing or curing chronic disease. It is against their fiduciary or legal responsibility, which is to their shareholders, to go ahead and push things that will prevent you from developing chronic disease. They know that if we rebalance everybody's testosterone, which of course will rebalance their estrogen too in their cells, that we're looking at over half of chronic diseases disappearing. And that would mean that close to half of their revenue would disappear. So this is not something that they want to do. So how do they combat that? They combat that by controlling the literature. They control medical education. They fund NIH. They fund the FDA. They fund medical research at medical universities. They fund the publications, the medical journal publications. They fund the medical specialty societies. And we now reached a point where over 70% of the articles in peer-reviewed medical journals are false. They're not reproducible in independent labs, over 70%. Now, why is that? Well, because if the people writing the articles want to go ahead and get funding so they can keep their lab, they can pay for their mortgage, and they can do other things, they need to please the person that's funding them, which has a vested interest in selling medications and not a vested interest in actually getting you healthy or preventing disease. So then people say, well, how about the insurance companies? Well, the insurance companies don't necessarily want you healthy. Sure, each year that they don't have to pay out a claim, they get to keep a little more money, but not really, because they're regulated. And the following year, they have to cut their premiums. So they can keep 20 to 25% of their revenue for administrative expenses and profit. But that dollar amount gets bigger and bigger the more they have to pay out and the sicker you get. And then you look at the hospital systems, and of course the hospital systems only really make money if you're sick, and chronic disease is the number one moneymaker. So this leaves you, your family, and likely your personal physician who would really like to get you healthy, but the person you trust to give you advice is miseducated. They're not uneducated. They're miseducated on purpose on what the disease process is, what the causes of the disease are, and how to keep you healthy. And so that's why I wrote the book. To give you one really upsetting example, I have a dear friend in Ohio who's a breast cancer surgeon, Dr. Rebecca Glazer, and she does a lot of research now just on hormones and breast cancer, particularly testosterone in breast cancer, and she has hundreds of articles published over the last 20 some years. And Dr. Glazer, after a 10-year study giving women testosterone pellets, found she reduced breast cancer rates by close to 50%. But none of the breast cancer societies would let her speak in the US. She had to present it in Europe because the people that fund the breast cancer societies and sit on the board are mostly the pharmaceutical industry. And for them to promote somebody who would reduce their chemotherapy revenues by 50% would be a violation of their legal responsibilities to their shareholders. And that is sort of a summary of why nobody wants you healthy and how ugly it gets.
In order to not leave people just alarmed with nothing to do, we have solutions to this problem, don't we? We have the testosterone pellet therapy.
That's correct. That's absolutely correct. The problem with testosterone pellet therapy is not that it doesn't work. The problem with it is it's not patentable because it's a human hormone and it's been used since 1940, and it cures too many diseases.
Basically, it's a natural occurring substance that we are helping people get back. And then you can reverse some of these diagnosed things that are happening as a result of the microplastics that are all in our systems.
It's very difficult to detoxify from those microscopic plastics. So what testosterone does is it can prevent many chronic diseases. It can reverse some chronic diseases. It certainly makes people feel better. And we can get in that in the second part of the show that we're going to do. But the problem with microscopic plastics is that the phthalates that are in them can be absorbed through your skin. So for example, in your cosmetics, they put phthalates because it makes things flow smoothly, just like they put it in concrete because it makes concrete flow smoothly. So it can be absorbed through your skin. Secondly, it can be absorbed through your GI tract. So, the hundreds of thousands of microscopic plastic particles in your bottled water, they get absorbed right through into your GI tract. And lastly, they can be absorbed through the air. And the air in every continent, including Antarctica, is filled with microscopic plastic. So you can breathe it in and it goes into your lungs, into the little air sacs called alveoli. And then from there, it goes into your bloodstream. So the idea that you will never be exposed to microscopic plastics is a fantasy. You will be exposed to it no matter what. I mean, I do things like have a whole house water filtration system to try to keep it out of my water. I stay away from things that come in plastic packaging as far as food goes. But I have milk and it's a cardboard container. But to get into the sterilizer at the dairy, it went through a big plastic tube. So the idea that we're going to prevent this is really crazy. Let's have a grass-fed, steak, and that's really healthy, organic, grass-fed steak, no pesticides, no hormones, no anything. But the cow's eating grass. And that grass is laced with microscopic plastics that fell out of the air. 100% of placentas, when they examine them, have microscopic plastic in it. Testicles have microscopic plastic in it. And we wonder why we have this huge infertility problem, so that by 2050, we predict most all pregnancies will be in vitro. It's pretty clear what's going on with these microscopic plastics. And some of these chemicals that are in the plastics can affect the fetus. So one interesting little science article that came out about 6 months ago, there was a chemical called PBA. And I don't know if you are familiar with it, but PBA was used in polycarbonate bottles. And years ago, we decided they were too dangerous for kids and they shouldn't be in any product that could be ingested or touch food that would be ingested or water. So they took PBA out of those things. They're still in kids' toys that they chew, but they took it out of everything else. And they came up with PBS, thinking PBS was a much safer substitute. Only now we find out that PBS crosses the placenta and it is a neuroendocrine disruptor. In other words, it disrupts the hormones critical for a fetus's developing brain. So what they've noticed in humans by observation and what they've noticed in animal experiments where they purposely have PBS in their environment is that the offspring have learning disabilities, they have aggressive behavioral disorders, and they don't act like their gender-specific behavior. In other words, a female fox that's born will not act like a typical female fox, and a male fox that's born won't act like a typical male fox. So you end up, of course, having disruption in the whole reproduction family cycle of foxes, just like we're ending up having disruption in the whole family cycle of humans. So these are things that are really important. And for the people that say we're just going to ban plastics from our environment, I'd love to see that happen. There's no way that's happening. It's a multi-generational problem, and we have to find a good substitute, and it needs to be a Manhattan-style project for the government of all the industrialized countries to figure out how to replace all these plastics as fast as possible with something that is not going to kill us.
So we have some solutions and some answers, and we're going to get into those in detail a little bit more in the second half of our conversation. But for now, I would like for you to list the links and how people can find your podcast and get a copy of your very important book.
Okay, sure. I'd love to tell you. So the link, the easiest way is to go to nobodywantsyouhealthy.com. And the title of the book is Nobody Wants You Healthy, Achieving Better Health by Avoiding the Corruptions in Modern Medical Science. And at that website, you'll have a link to Amazon to the book. You'll have a link to podcasts, interviews, all those sort of things.
Well, I hope that all of you listening were inspired to take back charge of your health and that you were informed about the role of testosterone and the ways that you can replace that in your life. And of course, I also hope that you will hit subscribe and come back for the next episode of Flourish-Meant.